Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Social Blueprint interview where we highlight people in the community who you may or may not know. And in this case, it is somebody that many of you already will recognize, Nina Bassat. But before we get to our discussion today, you know the drill. Like, subscribe to our channel, sign up. We have the largest online events calendar in the Melbourne community. Businesses over 500 are signed up with us. It's a great resource for all. And now, Nina, welcome.
Thank you.
Nina, you had a very interesting tour, I would say, just yesterday, even at the Holocaust Museum. And maybe can you just discuss it a little bit because it'll tie into our bigger discussion today?
Yes, I had the real privilege of being shown around by Steve Cook, who's a fairly new CEO, and accompanied by my daughter-in-law, Nina Bassat, who's a board member. We went on a tour with a family, the Benai family. There is Yaldi, his father Manny, and his wife Elona. And the reason it was so poignant and so emotional is that they're an Albanian family whose ancestors saved Jews during the Shoah. And to speak to these people and to hear the story and how they had saved them and how they carried their courage so lightly. It was, well, of course we did that because that's what had to be done. I was literally moved to tears during the visit.
Right, amazing. And now, Nina, I want to tie it in to today and the current climate, if you will, of anti-Semitism out there. And specifically, you deal a lot with the non-Jewish community here as well. Now, this is a big open-ended question, but why should non-Jewish Australians really care about what is going on in the world right now?
You know, everybody says anti-Semitism is the canary in the mine. They say it because it actually is true. Anti-Semitism is a precursor to what happens within the community. First they come for the Jews, then they come for the rest of us.
Sure.
It's been said over and over again, and these truisms are true. Anti-Semitism, of course, to us is deeply personal. We
Right.
don't want our children not being allowed on the bus because they're in a school uniform, Jewish school uniform. We don't want our schools daubed. We don't want shops and damaged and artists doxxed. We don't want it, and it hurts us in a visceral manner. Of course it does. But it's not just our problem. It's a societal problem, because a society that allows that degree of discrimination, a society that allows that degree of incivility,
Right.
is a society that's beginning to rot.
Right.
And if this is not stopped right at the beginning, it becomes normalized. We're back to, if a person of Chinese origin arrived, they would be derided, or if there was a Wog, if you were, either Italian or Greek. We do not want to go back to that. We have we had before October the 7th, a level of multiculturalism, a
Right.
level of acceptance that we all took for granted.
Yeah.
That vanished in a millisecond, and it is not our problem. It is our pain. Don't misunderstand me. It is our
Sure.
pain, but it is not our problem. It is a societal problem, and it's a societal problem that needs to be dealt with at every level. It needs to certainly be dealt with at leadership level, and I'm talking federal, state, organizational.
Right.
It needs to be dealt
The
with.
whole- yeah.
But also, I keep being told by my non-Jewish friends, and I believe them, that the silent majority is not anti-Semitic and that the silent majority is behind us.
Right.
I keep being told that again and again by non-Jews. Having said that, the silent majority, by its very definition of silence, doesn't help us.
Right.
If you don't speak up, how do people know that you're behind us? Speak up whichever way you can, by voting against people who are anti-Semitic,
Right.
by commenting if you're in the workplace and someone makes an anti-Semitic comment. Don't sit there and just look embarrassed. If someone does something that you know is morally reprehensible, because all racism, whether it's anti-Semitism or anything else, is morally reprehensible, speak out.
Right. And on that note, because we know it can certainly be extremely difficult for a non-Jewish person to speak out and say, I support Israel, as an example. But would you encourage them to say, this is not an Australian value system, or this is not a Western value system, or something of that nature?
I don't even think you would have to narrow it down to an Australian value system or a Western value. I think you need to say, this is totally inappropriate.
Right.
You stop and think about it, put it into another context. Would you still be saying the same thing?
Yeah.
If this wasn't about Jews, would you still be using the same language? And that is a reasonable benchmark to ask them to adopt.
Right. And you just mentioned, think about it. That was your words here. And I also was read where you've spoken about narrow-mindedness. And I'm also tying it in, especially towards the Ivy League colleges or universities here. There seems to be identity politics going on, which is, as you said, about narrow-mindedness. Can you just discuss that a little bit?
It's probably one of the toughest topics we are facing at the moment, because there was a very interesting comment in The Australian last week. Someone said, why is it that when there is an article or a comment or a letter coming from a Jewish person, it's nuanced, it's reasoned, it's calm, and it's logical? Why is it that when we get comments from the other side, and I don't know how narrow or wide the other side is,
right,
it's just preaching violence and hatred?
Right.
And this is something I am struggling to come to terms with. This. Why does a protest have to be violent? Why does a sit-in have to be violent? Why is there so much obscenity coming out of the mouths of beautiful young students?
Right.
Can't they speak rationally? Can't they listen to the other side? I find this totally bewildering. We are losing our own humanity, or those of us who behave in that way,
right,
are losing our own humanity. And if I was a parent of one of those protesters, I would be deeply distressed at how my child was growing up.
Yeah, and what's even more unthinkable in a way is that it's happening at the best and brightest universities, isn't it?
Well, are they now?
That's a great question. And we actually, on that note, and we can put a link to it, we spoke with the former dean of Columbia College, and he had some interesting ideas about that as well. But it really is a point about, and perhaps one of the things that we want to get out is, what are some of the tools? How can we speak with especially the non-Jewish community in a way that's engaging with them, as opposed to, as you said, just hurling back and forth where really it achieves nothing?
I firmly believe that you cannot reason with an ideologue. Someone who is committed to an ideology to an extreme, and a lot of the people you were talking about are,
yes,
does not understand reason. It's like a 2-year-old child who's lying on the floor kicking its feet in a tantrum. You do not reason with a tantrum.
Absolutely.
Child. You let the tantrum play out, and then you comfort them, or you explain things when they've quietened down. So if I were to engage, if I were a student on
yes,
campus, if I were in any way inclined to engage with someone on campus, I wouldn't argue about the history of Israel or the history
right,
of 7th of October, or why have you not spoken out about what is happening in Sudan, and why have you not spoken about
right,
what's happening in Pakistan and the famines everywhere else? Why are you choosing this and being basically anti-Semitic, because you're not just being anti-Israel? So I wouldn't engage in that, because they'll just say you're a blind Zionist believing in lies.
right.
You don't do that. You just say, why don't you show civility? Why don't you show courtesy? Why don't you do what you're doing in a rational, intelligent way, rather than presenting yourself in a fairly ugly way?
Right.
I think that's all you can do.
Yeah.
I don't think, I feel very sad. I'm involved with this group of women, Project 2A, I think it's now called. And these women are wonderful. And they write intelligent, cogent letters explaining what the other side is doing wrong. But those explanations are wasted, and the other side will not read them and will not try to understand them. I think you just have to say, this is not behavior that we accept. And you mentioned Australian society,
Yes.
Western society. It's not behavior that should be accepted in any society.
Sure.
You know, I don't think the average Iranian would behave like that given a different regime or give, you know,
Absolutely.
people are good and people don't want to behave like that. And this is what is hurting me the most, to see our society, you know, go to hell in a handbasket, basically.
Yeah. Are you surprised, now looking back, you know, pre-October 7th, there actually are a lot of, I'd call events or clues that maybe anti-Semitism was a little bit more than a lot of people thought?
No, I'm not surprised, but don't forget, I've had years and years of being associated with Australian communal organisations, and the Executive Council of Australian Jewry has been publishing an anti-Semitism report for many, many, many years.
Right.
And when you publish an annual report that's 365 pages long, you know that there is anti-Semitism.
Right.
So I've known this for a very, very long time. What surprised me are a number of things. The first one is the rapidity within which it bubbled to the surface.
Yes.
The second one is how quickly it became normalized on a large scale.
Yes, especially in that, call 18 to 30-year-old demographic.
Yes, very much so. The other thing is how quickly it became politicized within our parliament and didn't get squashed. So these are the things that surprised me. It's the form it's taken, it's the size it's taken, it's the rapidity. That surprised me. But the fact of the anti-Semitism, no. And
Right.
I know I'm a very old woman and old people hark back, but it's possibly been 9 or 10 years that I've been saying I have a sense of the 1930s being revisited worldwide. It just took longer to be revisited in Australia.
Yeah, I think that just agreeing with that, starting around 2010, I believe, and this is before you could say Trump, Biden, or whatever you want to call it there, East or West, it already was starting to happen. And I think that there is a lot of social and economic issues
Of course.
that are playing into it.
If I may, I know people who were living in Israel in 10, 12 years ago who would go on holiday in France and come home and say, I feel so much safer here. So France was a very good example of what was happening. And Sweden was unbelievable. People in Malmö had to stop going to synagogue and wearing their kippot. You know, nice little Malmö in Sweden.
Right.
So there were signs all over.
Right. And also, and I guess this is, as you said, you've seen it a few generations, is now the time though that we need to quash it. Like we cannot wait another day.
It's always the time to
Right.
quash it. I spoke recently about the rapidity that Germany went from a democracy to a dictatorship.
Yeah.
And it was a matter of days. We're not talking months, we're not talking years. We do not, I think most people, I don't say we, I think Jews do understand it, but most people do not understand how quickly the cultural climate can change.
Yes.
It's 1 minute, it's turning on a pin. And now is very much the time to be doing things, but it does need to come from the top.
Right. And coming from the top, meaning the leadership.
I mean, the leadership, and I know when I say the leadership, people automatically assume I mean the political leadership, and of course I do, but I also mean the leadership in a football club, and I also mean the leadership everywhere, or in the office. You hear something's not good, you stomp it out straight away, you don't let it fester.
Yes. And by the way, those are great words of advice for any situation.
Yes.
Get to it. If there's a controversy or a problem, get to it early. Don't wait.
So. It always exacerbates and becomes bigger. You know, it's like not doing the dishes after dinner. It's not a big deal, but when you come back to it at 11 o'clock at night, it's massive.
Yes.
So.
Especially if you wait a couple of days. Yes.
Well, I don't know about the couple of days. Haven't been there yet. Might get there.
Our dishwasher's broken right now, everybody. That's why we're having an issue. Again, I'm really interested in the tools of how to speak with people, and one of those that you've written about, you authored a book about it, is what would you do? And it's easy for us to sit here and to pontificate that, well, we would always do the right thing, but it's not so easy, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. You've actually packed together two issues.
Yeah.
One is your question, how do you have the courage to do the right
Yes.
thing? But you've missed a step, how do you know what is the right thing?
Yeah.
And that sometimes, unfortunately, is no longer a given, because so many, and I'm speaking more of the younger demographic, not so much my demographic, but the very young and the
Yes.
middle demographic get their information from unreliable sources, from hearsay, from TikTok, from
Right.
Instagram, God knows where. They get their information from wherever. They don't process it, they don't analyze it. And this must affect their moral compass. It must. If you don't know, if you're hearing everything and you're just accepting it, you start losing a sense of what is wrong and what is right. So before you can know how to act, you have to relearn in some cases what
Yes.
is wrong and what is right. And once you've done that, then you have the harder or perhaps equally hard task of how do I step in?
Right.
And I gave an example in something I wrote recently about a young woman being harassed on a train.
Yeah.
And you're another young woman. What do you do?
Exactly.
Do you go up and say, hey, this is not on?
Right.
And then you might be attacked? What do you do? And my point is, yes, you need to do something. But if you're frightened that you also might be attacked, tap the man next to you who's looking reasonable and say, would you please come up with me and help me with this situation? If you feel that you're not strong enough or you're too vulnerable, don't automatically not do it. Get help. There will be someone who will help you speak up or help you do something. And it's the same in the office. Someone says something totally unacceptable and hurts someone, and you can see by their face they've been hurt.
Right.
Now, you may not even know, you know it's wrong, you may not even know how to do it. Grab someone else and say, hey, what that guy said wasn't right. Let's do something about it. And let's do it now, whilst the people who heard the first hurtful comment can hear the counter comment.
Yeah.
Don't let things slide, because then it's gone.
And that's a great point to mention about what I'd call travel in packs, meaning groups of people, because that does give you courage, especially in a time where, as you said, especially in that kind of 18 to 30-year-old demographic where it feels like the wave is against you, if you
Yeah.
will. And I want to also just touch again on what you mentioned about that, knowing what is the right thing to do, and back to identity politics, if you will, or identity. Do you find that is also one of the narrow-minded issues that a lot of young people are having?
Yes. It's a very complex world, and
For sure.
I am grateful that I'm not growing up in it, to be honest, and that I don't have young people growing up in it. It's a very complex world, and finding your identity is very difficult. So it becomes easy to latch on to something. And we saw that in the Me Too movement. There were people who might have been marginally harassed, but it hurt them, but they suddenly latched onto this movement, and they were speaking loud and clear and damaging people's name from what might have been a touch on the shoulder,
Right.
which they could have dealt with at the time and said, hey, I don't want you doing this,
Right.
rather than dwelling on it and blowing into it. It comes back to deal with things at the time. So people latch onto identities. There are children
For sure.
dying in Gaza. I don't think there is a Jew in Melbourne who doesn't feel sympathy for
Sure.
the people dying in Gaza.
Right.
I don't think that's the case.
Absolutely.
This is a child, and you feel for the child and for the mother and for the family. But to latch onto it as being the only cause, when there are so many other causes, and to
Right.
pick not just on Israel, that is the country that is at war with Hamas, but on the Jewish people worldwide, that is taking your identity beyond all logic and beyond all barriers.
Yeah, I think it's such a epidemic right now, is that narrow-mindedness, the identity, and I think that to some degree that everybody wants to be part of something, but we do need to question what exactly it is.
100%. I think that's right. What are you identifying with? Is what you are identifying with genuine? Is it just because you want to be part of something? Does it actually speak to improving the world, or is it just giving you a voice which is meaningless?
Yeah, and also adding to that, and I can't help but mention it, that feeling of oppress versus oppressor, framing it in that way is one of the, if there's one thing I do know for young people, that is a disastrous way to think. One thing I'm really coming away with today is that thing to be open-minded is to do your own work, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Question everything. Question the sources where you're getting your information. Don't take everything you see or read for granted. Find out how reliable that information is. Find out whether it's biased opinion or fact. You need to do that for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that also, one of the hardest things to do is to hear the other side, isn't it?
Yes, because your emotions become involved, and it's very, very difficult to stay calm, to argue, to play the ball, not the man, basically,
right.
To argue the point.
That's a great phrase, yeah.
And that's what we need to remember, because every time you play the man, you diminish yourself and you diminish your argument.
Yeah. This has been amazing, and I really wanted to focus on, what are the tools that we can use today. I've certainly gotten a lot out of it. Do you have any closing comments for people?
Again, you speak in trite phrases because they are so true. Just be true to your moral compass. Find it and then be true to it. That's all any of us should be aiming for.
I can't think of a better way to end than that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.